Underway. I see that Senator Fisher, who will be speaking to us about her bill, is here. I understand that Senator Klobuchar is in a leadership meeting and will try to get here, but we'll proceed in this markup first with my opening statement, then with our distinguished ranking member's opening statement, then with Senator Fisher's remarks, and if Senator Klobuchar is here, then with her remarks. We will also need a few more senators to be here before we can take up the actual business of the markup. So I hope that our senators will appear in time. But in the meantime, I'm delighted to be doing something rather unusual in the Budget Committee, which is to be marking up legislation. This morning, the committee will consider and vote on S-1274, the Railroad Employee Equity and Fairness, or REEF Act. This bipartisan legislation would permanently end mandated cuts to railroad workers' unemployment and sickness insurance benefits, putting more money in the pockets of railroad employees. Nearly 200,000 active railroad workers are eligible for unemployment and sickness benefits from the Railroad Retirement Board's unemployment insurance account. But likely because of an omission Congress made almost 40 years ago, the Railroad Retirement Board is subject to sequestration. Beginning on May 10, 2023, sequestration reduced railroad unemployment and sickness insurance benefits by 5.7%, reviving benefit cuts that had been paused during the pandemic. No other unemployed workers face these kinds of cuts, and no one should. So today's markup of the REEF Act is the first step to fixing that error and ensuring that affected railroad workers receive their full earned benefits. Workers should receive the benefits they have worked for and are entitled to. This bipartisan legislation is championed by both railroad labor and railroad industry. I ask unanimous consent that a letter written jointly by rail corporations and rail workers be inserted into the record. Without objection, it will be. This bipartisan legislation also does not make any changes to the program's eligibility or benefit structure. And because the Railroad Unemployment Program is self-financing and has a dedicated trust fund, paying these benefits does not meaningfully contribute to the deficit. It never made sense for it to be sequestered. And the bill before us today, which would exempt railroad workers' earned benefits from sequestration, has no meaningful effect on the deficit either. So I strongly recommend that all members vote yes on this bipartisan bill. Finally, I'd like to thank our esteemed colleague from Nebraska, Senator Fisher, for her leadership and work to correct this oversight and for her willingness to join us today to speak on her bill. I also want to recognize our distinguished colleague from Minnesota, Senator Klobuchar, who was an introductory co-sponsor of the REEF Act and who has championed this bipartisan legislation alongside Senator Brown. I will recognize them both as present, both after Ranking Member Grassley gives his remarks. Senator Grassley.
Well, I'm going to start where you started, and that these markups are very unusual in this committee. The last real markup we had was 2019, when we reported out a bipartisan budget process reform legislation that you put together with our mutual friend, the late Mike Enzi. By law, this committee is supposed to report about a budget resolution every year by April 1. That's our statutory duty and the reason this committee was created, but we haven't marked up a budget resolution since Senator Enzi was chairman. Members of on our side have been hopeful that the committee would eventually turn to giving the 50-year-old Congressional Budget Act a much-needed tune-up, as you've previously suggested, Mr. Chairman. But so far this Congress, the Senate Budget Committee, has held 14 hearings on climate change. We've had hearings on immigration, inequality, and even on abortion, but not a single hearing on how we can work together to reform a budget process that everyone agrees is broken. That means that this markup may be the only opportunity to put forward ideas to bring the Budget Act into the 21st century. For that reason, I filed several amendments that address some of the problems with the current dysfunctioning budget process. But out of respect for you, Mr. Chairman, and the sponsors of the bill before us, Senator Fisher and Klobuchar, I don't plan on offering any of my amendments, but I hope you'll understand the frustration on our side and take a look at some of these solutions. These aren't partisan gotcha amendments. Several of my amendments would add bipartisan provisions from the NZ Whitehouse budget process reform bill. I want to work with you, Mr. Chairman, on this process. A markup of a bipartisan bill, followed by what I hope will be a primary care hearing with a bipartisan tone, is a nice change of pace. And I hope after next week's hearing on the President's budget request, we can identify more opportunities to find common ground. Now let's talk about the REEF Act. There are plenty of programs that I think ought to be exempt from sequestration cuts. That said, the Budget Committee shouldn't be in the business of approving new exemptions to sequestration on a piecemeal basis without thoughtful consideration. Otherwise, we risk opening the floodgates to a rash of new exemptions that undermine sequestration as a budget enforcement tool and grow our already massive deficits. However, the bill before us today deals with a unique case. The Railroad Unemployment Insurance Program is designed to be self-financed by taxes on railroad employers. But unlike many other unemployment programs or other benefits administered by the Railroad Retirement Board, railroad unemployment benefits are subject to sequestration. As far back as 1986, the heads of the Congressional Budget Office and Government Accountability Office told this committee that subjecting railroad unemployment benefits to sequestration was probably a legislative oversight. Thus, arguments to add this program to the exemption list have merit. However, there's a serious problem with the bill from the Budget Committee perspective. According to CBO, the bill would increase spending and deficits, however small in the scheme of things as we know them today. This legislation is probably more likely to get to the President's desk if it's ultimately paid for. But at this stage of the process, I'll be supporting moving this bill forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I turn to our two guests, let me just briefly respond by, first of all, thanking you for the amendments and for not pursuing at this particular moment. I think it is very important that this committee keep the prospect of budget reforms alive, and I think your amendments contribute to that. And I think I've established some good faith credentials in the work that I did with Senator Enzi on that. And as we move into a hearing on health care, which I think is has a lot of bipartisan potential, there's one way we can look at reducing debt and deficits by improving the healthcare system. So thank you for all of that, and thank you for your support for this measure today in the committee. Let me turn first to Senator Fisher for her statement. Thank you very much for being here.
Chairman Whitehouse, Ranking Member Grassley, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to introduce my Railroad Employee Equity and Fairness Act, or the REEF Act, for today's markup. This bipartisan bill is an example of the legislating we don't always hear about in the news. Legislating where Republicans and Democrats come together to accomplish real things for real people. In this case, those people are Americans' railroad employees. The REEF Act would support and protect railroad workers by ending cuts to their unemployment and sickness benefits. Current law mandates the Railroad Retirement Board, the agency that administers benefits to railroad employees, cut its unemployment insurance account every year. These sequestration cuts of 5.7% annually began in May 2023 and are set to continue through fiscal year 2031. As a member of the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, I've heard from railroad workers about the effects these cuts are already having. I've spoken with them about the ways these cuts are disadvantaging them and creating instability in the industry, especially because more cuts are coming over the next several years. Railroad Unemployment Insurance Act benefits are the only federal benefits program entirely funded by the railroad industry. And the special payroll taxes and surcharges the industry collects with no payments from taxpayers. So these sequestration cuts are doing nothing to curb the spending of taxpayer funds. They are only hurting railroad workers. Railroad employees play an indispensable role in keeping our trains moving, whether to transport passengers or freight. The network is a significant contributor to our economy. On a practical level, we don't want to hinder workers from entering or remaining in the industry. But more importantly, we must protect our railroad employees and their livelihoods. They deserve the benefits they have earned by committing their careers to the railroad, in many cases for years or for decades. Rail workers shouldn't be penalized for doing work that is necessary to our economy and transportation network. The REEF Act will right the wrong of unfair cuts, ensuring that the people who keep our trains moving receive the benefits that they earned. I'm grateful this legislation will be considered at today's markup. This is a common sense, bipartisan legislative change that is long overdue. Railroad workers need the support we can provide through passing this bill, and I look forward to following through for them soon. I thank Senator Klobuchar for being an original co-sponsor of this legislation. It is always a pleasure to work with her on important issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. I'll now recognize Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I don't think I've ever testified before the Budget Committee on a legislative issue. So hello to my colleagues. And it's an honor to be here with Senator Fisher. As you all know, we're the chair and ranking member of the Rules Committee. And we came together on this bill because of our work on the Commerce Committee. Thank you for holding this markup on the Railroad Employee Equity and Fairness Act, which Senator Fisher and I lead along with Senator Brown. We all know how important railroads have been to America's economic success. To this day, our rail infrastructure is a critical engine. That was a little pun for early in the morning. Come on. Of our nation's economy. Americans rely on our rail system to move 1.7 billion tons of goods every single year. But we know that trains don't run on their own. Every product and every passenger depends on our rail workers to get from point A to point B. Like all American workers, our rail workers deserve the benefits they've spent their entire careers earning. And it's on us to ensure that they get to keep those benefits. That's why we have joined together on this bill, the REEF Act, and hope that you will support it to get it out of committee. If we don't pass the bill, our rail workers' unemployment benefits will continue to be slashed through 2030. These add up to $100 per month in lost benefits that could go toward a worker's grocery or utilities bill. No other workers get their unemployment and sickness benefits cut under sequestration. Rail workers should not be the exception. They deserve the benefits that they've earned. Whether it's by getting steel to factories or food to the kitchen table, our rail system and those who work on it keep our economy moving. And I ask my colleagues who serve on this committee to support this critical legislation. Thank you. And thank you to my colleague, Senator Fisher.
Thank you very much. I know that Senator Fisher and Senator Klobuchar are both very busy, and you're welcome to remain, but you're also welcome to go about the rest of your days. Thank you very much for being here and for your opening statements. We are close to having sufficient numbers to vote the bill out. We do have a sufficient quorum for consideration of amendments. The ranking member has indicated that he will not be pursuing his amendments. Before we turn to amendments, does any other senator wish to make an opening statement on the bill? If there are no other opening statements, the committee will proceed to consideration of S-1274, the REEF Act. If there is no further debate or further amendment, the question will be on ordering S-1274 favorably reported. When we get to that, I will be voting aye, and I will wait a moment to see if we can get one more senator here before I ask the clerk to call the roll. We are at 10 with Senator Scott in the ante room, and we need 11. So if we could just hold in place for a moment while we round up one more colleague. We are, we'll be ready to go. I would like to recognize that the co-sponsors of this bill from the committee are Senator Sanders, Senator Braun, Senator Marshall, who is here, thank you, sir, and Senator Crapo. So thank all of them for their co-sponsorship of this measure. What's the report? I'm getting one more.